Hey everybody, how's everybody doing? This is Kaya Savas here. I'm the founder of FIlm.Music.Media. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Composer's Dream. Just making sure we're good to go. Well, again, sorry, thanks again for joining us tonight. We're getting started right now. Again, I want to thank anyone from around the world who's watching, whether you're local here in LA or around the country, around different countries. Thanks so much for joining us. And I know there's a lot of things going on right now in the world. It's a crazy time for everybody. So I think it's good to get together with some really talented people, reflect on their craft and their work. And this is the first for FIlm.Music.Media as well. So I want to thank Impact 24 PR for coordinating this amazing live panel. And so yeah, let's get started. Let's start introducing our guests. So first up is Phil McGowan. Phil, you want to come on in? There's Phil. So Phil is a score mixer. Phil McGowan has collaborated with a number of prolific composers, including Trevor Morris, Jack Well, Atlior Varson, Nathan Whitehead, Bobby Tahori, and John Piasano, to record and mix music for film, TV, and video games. His work with Danny Benzi and Sander Durand on Netflix's hit series Ozark earned Phil his first Emmy nomination, so congrats on that, Phil. Phil, I believe you're still muted.
Is that working now?
There we go.
Okay.
All right.
Yes,
Phil is
thank
here.
you. Hi.
All right. So we are here. Next up is Peter Bawiec. Peter is an Emmy-nominated sound designer and re-recording mixer for film and TV. He has sound designed and mixed for a number of major players, including Universal, Disney, Sony, Netflix, and Lionsgate. He received his first Emmy nomination as the re-recording mixer of ABC's Modern Family and MPSE Golden Reel Award nomination for sound editing score, a film music documentary. I know a lot of people here have probably seen that as well. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
Right. Yeah, for sure. All right, up next we have Crystal Grooms Mangano. Composer and music supervisor Crystal Grooms Mangano has contributed her skills to a variety of TV and film projects. Crystal music supervised Netflix's Emmy-nominated series, Dolly Parton's Heartstrings, which brought together an incredible music team from LA, Nashville, and Atlanta. As a composer, Crystal's original music for the South by Southwest selection Asperger's Are Us earned her a nomination for a Hollywood Music and Media Award. Let's welcome Crystal.
Hi, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. Hey, Crystal. And coming up, we have Jonathan Beard, one of the most sought-after orchestrators in LA. Jonathan is the co-founder of the boutique music team 2D Music Partners, who orchestrated episodes 4, 5, and 6 of Disney's The Mandalorian. Jonathan has worked for many years with composers Tom Holkenberg, aka Junkie XL, and Bear McCreary, and has also recently worked with composers like Chris Bowers, Michael Abels, Pinar Toprok, Heitor Pereira, and Adam Taylor.
Hey, everyone.
Welcome, John. Hey,
Glad
Jonathan.
to be here.
All right, well, first things first, I got to do some housekeeping. I'm just going to pour myself so we can properly start this evening. I want a toast to everyone here. I think Phil went to go get some good scotch too, because I know Phil is a scotch man. There he is.
I'm unprepared.
Yeah, let's do this.
I wish I knew.
All right.
Every studio needs a bar.
Yeah. So let's just start and go down the line, and we can start with Phil. Pretty much, give me your kind of elevator pitch. If you're stuck in in an elevator with somebody, and you had about a minute to tell them what you do for a living, what do you do for a living? What's your title, and what do you do?
So I'm a score mixer, which basically means I'm the sort of intermediary between the composer and the dub team. Well, me and technically the music editor, but the music always comes to me first. I take all the elements that the composers have created in their sequencer and mix that, sometimes against live elements. If we record live orchestra, I'll also record that if it's in town or if there's budget to fly me overseas. But these days, a lot of times it's remote. So I'm just sent all the elements and I compile them all together and make them sound their best, do a mix, typically in some surround sound format, though a few things are still in stereo these days. And get it sounding its very best against dialogue and sound effects. And then I pass that on to either a music editor or directly to a re-recording mixer, who's then going to dub it against the dialogue and sound effects for the final mix.
All right. Awesome. Peter.
Yeah,
What
I
do you
just
do for
so I'm Peter Bravis. I'm a sound designer, re-recording mixer, and we just realized with Phil that we actually worked together on 2 movies just before COVID hit.
Yeah.
Which I just was looking at his IMDb. I'm like, oh man, and it was just before COVID hit, 2
Oh,
movies
wow.
back to back,
Yeah.
and I was just like, wait, we were on the same email chains. So yeah, he did describe it correct. Like I get all the music from the score mixer, and as the re-recording mixer on stage, typically there's 2 of us. One of us will handle dialogue music, and the other person is going to handle all the sound effects. And sometimes we flip, sometimes we switch things up around, but typically that's how it works. And we take that hundreds of tracks, because really at the end of the whole sound process, when you add all the dialogue, all the music, all the sound effects, you're talking about hundreds of tracks, multiple computers running simultaneously. That all has to be mixed. So then that's kind of our job, to find a balance where we tell a story that the audience enjoys.
Absolutely. All right, let's hear from Crystal.
So I am a music supervisor, and music supervisor, kind of in broad terms, works with the director or producer to establish a tone and direction for the music for a project. So then it gets more specific within the project, obviously, depending on the needs of whatever film, TV, video game you're working on. So it could include things like licensing songs to use in the production. It could be working with on-camera musicians. It could be working with the composing team. It all just depends, but essentially it's kind of a broad umbrella, oversee the music for the production.
Awesome. And Jonathan.
So people usually have an idea of what a composer does, but the orchestrator definitely gets more shrugs in the elevator. So the analogy that I like to use, and it's not perfect, but it's close, is the relationship of a composer to an orchestrator is similar to the relationship of an architect to an engineer. So if you're building a building, it's the architect's creative vision, and ultimately the architect will be transferring that information to the engineer, who's responsible for delivering the final product, essentially. And for a score that has acoustic orchestral musicians recording on it, that is a very similar relationship between the 2 of us. So a composer has the creative vision, and as an orchestrator, it'll be my job to take the composer's sketches and basically bring them to completion into the final sheet music score form that the live orchestra will actually record. Now, some composers are, just like architects, I suppose, are extremely detailed, and so their sketches basically have everything already there. And then some composers are slightly more big picture thinkers, and so it may be the broad ideas, and then they are looking to me to help fill in some of those gaps. And it can kind of be all over that spectrum, and anywhere on that spectrum has its own unique and exciting set of challenges. So it's a really fun job, pretty much in every situation.
Yeah, and then during the recording, I mean, and you guys are really on there. I mean, when I watch orchestrators work, it's really intense.
It can definitely get exciting in the end, particularly once you're already into the recording process and we decide we want to, adjust things or change them up a little bit.
So we'll go back down the line again for one more question. And then for this one, if just in a few words, we could describe the kind of the most recent project that we're talking about. And how did you get involved with the project? Who, I guess, reaches out to you, or do you have to kind of champion yourself to get the job? And kind of describe the process of how you got involved. So we'll start back with Phil.
Yeah. So the project that I'm recently talking about now is Ozark, of course, which we just got nominated for an Emmy for.
Yeah, congrats, man. That's awesome.
Thank you. I've been working with Danny and Sonder for about 5 years now. The first project we did together was a film called The Gift that Jason Bateman was in. And I'm almost positive that's where the connection between Jason Bateman and Danny and Sonder happened. So it's kind of a funny coincidence that both that one project is what led to them getting Ozark and then me working with them. So yeah, typically I'm always hired by the composer. So Danny and Sonder hired me on this project like they have on a bunch of others. I actually just recently counted it up and we've done 37 projects now in the last 5 years. And some of those are TV shows. So it's been a lot of work between the 2 of us.
That's awesome. Peter.
sound designers or re-recording mixers depends who you're working with. Will either follow a director, so there's directors that I've worked with in the past multiple times, or producers or post supervisors will very often be the person who like keeps on calling us back to come back to do shows. Or it's a post house. And in case of Modern Family, I've been working with Smart Post, which is the facility where Modern Family has been mixing for 11 years. And they called me up and they said, hey, we need hands. The show, we've got one more season to go. Are you interested in coming on board? So I got to come on board of Modern Family for a couple of the final episodes.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yep.
All right, Crystal.
I'm here talking about Dolly Parton's Heartstrings. And for this project, I actually kind of came on in a little bit of what I feel is an unconventional way for music supervisors, but I actually came in through the composers. I had worked with them previously on Dolly Parton's Coat of Many Colors and Christmas of Many Colors. They're two movies that they had done a few years ago. And when we started, talking about Dolly Parton's Heartstrings, it was becoming evident that there were going to be a lot more music needs involved in this series than there had been in the previous movies that we'd done. And I'd been working as a music supervisor, and both Velton Ray Bunch and Mark Leggett, the composers, really advocated to bring me on in that capacity. And so that was how I ended up there.
Wow, that's awesome. Jonathan.
So I am, as you mentioned in the intro, the co-founder of a boutique orchestration team called Tutti Music Partners. And with my partners, Edward Tribeck and Henry Wilkinson, we have orchestrated a number of Ludwig's scores, I think, over the last 6 years or so, the most recent being The Mandalorian. And Ludwig and Henry actually went to school together back in the day. So there was that connection. I first met Ludwig probably about, 10 years ago, give or take, at a house party that he was hosting, because a good friend of mine was a young music editor and also his roommate. Fun side note, I also briefly met this up-and-coming young actor named Donald Glover at that party, and he and Ludwig were playing some music together in the living room that night. And looking back, that's a pretty fantastic way to meet those guys. So, but we've been professionally involved off and on for 5 or 6 years.
That's amazing. Yeah, I know they've been collaborating for a long time too. But so I want to jump to Peter. So Peter, Modern Family you mentioned has been around for almost 11 seasons, and so you did jump in kind of on the last season here. Did that impact how you approached the sound? And what was the directive that you were given? Did you have to kind of go back and see what was done the past decade, or was it kind of just straightforward and what was needed to be done?
No, I think I think because the show is 11 years then, you have to respect that. You can't just dive in and say, hey, I'm going to change absolutely everything that you guys do, right? No.
Right.
Because at that point, also something to realize is those shows are essentially machines, and there's so many things that aren't even said anymore. I was surprised I came in before I started. When I knew I'd be doing these mixes, I came in just to sit in the back of the room for 3 hours. And I was just like, wow, they're not talking at all. And everyone knows what's going on. And it's like, you have to understand the groove of those people, that there's a chemistry. I mean, the whole mixing team and the showrunners and the executives and the post producer, everyone, they know each other. And when you join that, you have to understand the show in and out. Especially on like the finale, there's so many tiny references to other episodes, to things that happened in the past, that you have to understand what to do now, because it's not just a stupid little joke and a gag. You actually have to kind of follow the same pattern that they did on that, season 3, episode 7. It's like, yeah, so long story short, yeah, I knew I had to rewatch everything, because Modern Family, I guess, is one of those shows that is like on peripheral for everyone. You kind of know about it. Not a lot of us watch it, but when I knew I'd be part of it, I had literally just binged the whole thing, and I was like, okay, time to learn now and to understand what's going on. So I guess we did a good job, because we got a nomination. Woo.
Yeah, that's amazing. Woo, congrats. So I want to jump over to Crystal. Crystal, so of course, Dolly is a legend and beloved by so many fans. I mean, she also has a huge discography of music. How is working on the show different from other projects you've worked on where you're selecting music from multiple artists? So you have this kind of one icon of music versus kind of piecing together something that's from many different sources.
Right. Yeah. You know, what was really unique about this project was how integrated we were able to use her songs into all of the musical elements of the score, whether it was using her vocals in the score, using having on-camera performances of her songs. It really just kind of, her music just permeated every element of this show, and it was just wonderful to work on. She was very generous with her music, and we took it very seriously and made sure to use it as best we could. And so each episode would have in the anthology, if you haven't seen it, each episode is based on one of her songs. So it either if it's a song that tells like that JJ Sneed is literally like this story, this kind of folklore story. And so the whole episode does that. And then there are other episodes that are a little more loosely based on kind of just the idea behind the song. And so we got to use her music in all different kinds of ways, which was just it was like a treasure trove to be able to call her studio in Nashville and say, hey, we're working on this. What do you think? And they'd send us back something amazing. It was incredible.
Yeah, I'm curious, what kind of access did you have to the vaults? Were you getting like down to stems and different, I mean, were you able to break things down? Like,
it depended, you know, her catalog goes back so far. I can't even imagine what goes into keeping it organized. And her Tom Rutledge, who I worked with at her studio the most, he was so on top of everything. You'd call and say, okay, we're working on this and we need this, and do we have just the vocal or the fiddle or something like this? And the next morning it'd be in my email box, you know. So yeah, like I said, they were very generous and very trusting too of the entire production team. So
that's amazing. Phil, so tell us about your working relationship with Danny and Saunders, the composers of Ozark. You've worked, you mentioned several projects together. At this point in your collaboration, I'm sure there's more trust and a shorthand. How did that develop, I guess, across the multiple projects you've worked? Or is it harder to work with someone for this long because they kind of know you better and they know if you're slacking maybe or something like that? I don't know.
No, at this point, it's pretty easy for me to work with them because we just kind of have a system down, and I, for the most part, kind of understand what they're going for. You have to be careful with their music because they like to process things a lot, and I think like the second project I did with them, I got a cue from them, and I totally cleaned it up too much. I like took out all the mid range. I like took their filters off. I was like, oh, these strings are all super dark sounding. I made it all sound nice, and they're like, whoa, no, it's supposed to be all murky and weird. And so I learned, I was like, okay, I have to like really make sure that I maintain the intention sonically of their cues, but then also just try to clear it up just enough so that it works well with dialogue and sound effects, and make sure the low end is balanced and things like that. So yeah, at this point, there's not a ton of notes, unless it's every now and then we get a project that's kind of outside of their regular wheelhouse, and or if it's a really big project, sometimes they'll be a little more nitpicky with things. But for the most part, it's pretty easy. The notes are really not too terrible anymore, and it's pretty broad stuff that I just kind of understand what to do.
Absolutely. So Jonathan, you work on the Mandalorian with Ludwig as the orchestrator. How did your team, I guess, collaborate with Ludwig? And you were talking about how different composers are more detailed with sketches and not. So what's that collaboration with Ludwig now you've done kind of separate projects together?
Sure. There are a couple of general points about how Ludwig works. One, he's incredibly detailed. So there's a lot of information there in his sketches, and he's iconoclastic in how he creates his music. There's no one doing it like him. So it's important to always be staying true to his vision. And he is also one of the coolest, calmest human beings I have ever met. I mean, it is an immensely amazing talent. And he, can eat pressure for breakfast and just get it done. So the result of that sometimes is that some things can come in pretty late. So having to be kind of ready at all stages of the possible sort of production timeline of when the music might need to be turned around. And that's one place where having our team comes in so handy, because Ed, Henry, and I can predict each other's moves just, without even thinking about it. But then also with composers where we've had longer relationships, like Phil was talking about, you start to develop some of that shorthand where more things can go unsaid. And so that's basically how it go. Ludwig's team is also really, really strong. His studio assistants and support staff are really good. And so they will be delivering stuff to the orchestrators that's usually already very clean and clear. And then we have to sort of take it that last 10 yards across the goal line. But it's always a dynamic and exciting process with Ludwig.
Yeah, he is very cool, calm, and collected. Like I think people get to see him because he has an amazing kind of loud fashion sense, but he's the most chill, coolest dude in the world.
Yeah, which is amazing hands to have your project in.
Yeah.
Like when you have someone who's that dependable and also someone who's always bringing the temperature of the room down and not contributing to any of the drama. It's a really great thing to have on your team.
Absolutely. So Crystal, so for Dolly Parton's Heartstrings, you coordinated with music teams from LA, Nashville, and Atlanta, and you were talking about kind of phoning up their studios and stuff like that. But you were also tasked with coordinating the on-screen performances. So what was it like juggling all of that?
At first it was a little daunting.
There
are a lot of moving pieces. But what's funny is that the on-camera musical performances kind of became my favorite part of the process by the end. I really enjoyed the process of kind of putting together these on-camera bands that were going to be in the episodes. There are a couple episodes where it's like a band in a bar is playing, or a wedding band, or things like this, and it gave me the opportunity to kind of meet some of the music community in Atlanta. Which I just really enjoyed. Everybody I worked with out there was so friendly and giving of their time and talents. And it was so much fun. I was just hoping, that there'd be on-camera performances in the next episode, because it was just so exciting to do it that way.
Absolutely. No, so Peter, we're talking, back about Modern Family. Do you have any favorite scenes that you worked on for this 11th season, and kind of what went into creating, the sound for these specific scenes?
Right. I mean, Modern Family is such an interesting show, because even if you're not a fan of it, it's like 11 years. It means there's something special for people, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think when we were starting the finale, we just hit play, we hit dim on the console just so it doesn't blow our ears, because when material isn't mixed, it's just so loud. And we just hit dim and we played the whole episode. It's like 22 minutes long, typically those episodes are. And so we hit play, and I was like, okay, so what is that thing? What's that element that people watch this show for? Because it's for sure in the finale, right? And then I kind of understood that the finale was the thing, because it wasn't really about one specific scene. It was throughout the whole finale, you had interwoven different motifs that were conclusions to things, to plot lines that were finished. They were wrapping up the whole show, essentially, right? And so it was really interesting, because like even the scene that you wouldn't expect much, let's say that literally the opening gag of the movie, of the episode, like even that had like a little hint, a wink to like the audience that really knows the show. And so I think it was fun to mix it, because you kind of have to find those things and make sure they cut through, because then we have 5 hours to mix it before the executives come in, and then you need to make sure that little joke, the one word, it's actually there, right? Although it's a throwaway line, like it's meant to be there. It's So I'd say that the whole episode itself, because like it's not like we say goodbye 150 times, right? No, we say goodbye once, but the whole gag of the episode is they keep on saying goodbye, 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 and there's like basically they're kind of going through biblical locust infections and different things happening, and they're saying goodbye so many times, and it's just a big joke. But at the end of the day, like you gotta hit that punchline, and put a period at the end of it, and it finishes, and you're like, well, that was nice. And so I think the whole episode, it surprised me. I'll put it that way. It really surprised me because I didn't expect for Modern Family to have an impact like it did on me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Phil, now in Ozark, there's an incredible theme for Ben and Wendy. So what went into the score mix for that theme, and how do you handle something that's like kind of a central piece like that?
That one definitely was. I remember getting that session and prepping it and opening it up and be like, oh wow, okay, there's like emotional piano now and things like that, which is pretty unusual for Ozark. So I mean, it was a little bit more of a direction towards I don't want to say typical TV scoring, but they almost never use piano on the show, and there's never really any sort of like heartfelt, warm, emotional parts because the show's always pretty dark and
Yeah.
there's bad stuff going on, or they're trying to get themselves out of the hole to launder more money and things like that. But yeah, we wanted to keep in the Ozark wheelhouse. So there are some other elements that are kind of repeat elements throughout the show. Some of the like clinky percussion and things like that, very subtly every now and then is in some of those cues. But then I remember there's this really big epic synth bass that comes in. I think it was a Moog or a Buchla that they put in there. And that was a little bit tough to get to work well. And I got it from then. It was like insanely huge in the low end. So that kind of stuff is really kind of have to balance it out, but keep the weight in there. But other than that, it wasn't too different from a typical Ozark cue.
Awesome. So I'm going to jump back to Jonathan. Now, Jonathan, episode 4 of The Mandalorian had the entire series had a lot of great music, but episode 4 was pretty noteworthy. Can you tell us more about orchestrating that episode?
Sure. I have a number of sort of favorite musical moments in that episode, but I should zoom out for a second and give an overview of sort of both a full disclosure overview and kind of just the structural way that the season was orchestrated. So Ludwig actually, because you had different episodes overlapping in their post-production schedules, and for anyone who's watched the season, every episode almost has its like own musical style. Like it's really broad. Where it musically needs to go. And so each episode has kind of a different feel from the others. So because of that, first of all, it made Ludwig a fantastic composer for the show because he has such a broad reach, but he also can fuse styles you'd never expect to work together in sort of an inimitable way. And so that said, he had to use, I guess, three and a half orchestration teams on the season. So Ed Henry and I were only working on episodes 4, 5, and 6, if I recall. We may have done a little bit of one other one. I'm forgetting now, but the sort of schedule just required it, and the fourth episode is the one where they are on a planet where this little town, this village is being threatened by these sort of evil people out in the forest. And there's this like Imperial Walker, the ATST Walker that's been repurposed by the bad guys, and they're terrorizing this town with this walker. And there's this great battle that happens that still sticks in my mind now because of the sort of the wonderful fusion, the stylistic fusion of what Ludwig's doing in the music. Like even within the 2 minutes, the 100 seconds or so of the climax of that scene, there's sort of these hints of Stravinsky, hints of Steiner, kind of the more strident main Mandalorian theme, and then there's a resolution, and it sort of unfolds into this sort of lush late John Barry strings kind of tapestry. And all of that is fused through the Ludwig lens. And so it hangs together. It's not a ripoff of any of those things, but it is sort of pulling on greats of the past and sort of reimagining them in a contemporary setting. And I personally can't think of anything that's more Star Warsian in its musical approach than that. So that's definitely a moment that sticks out for me in that episode.
Absolutely. And the whole series is fantastic. And I just love that how you mentioned how it was Star Warsian, but it's its own thing. It's amazing how it just feels so perfect for that world. So I kind of want to focus on Phil and Peter on this one, because as a score mixer and re-recording mixer sound designer, you guys also mentioned that you were working on 2 projects before the pandemic hit. So this question is, do you guys ever kind of overlap and collaborate with each other? And but I guess you were unknowingly working on the same stuff.
Well, a lot of things happened since COVID, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I'll put it from my perspective. Most of the time, the interface I have with the scoring mixer is on the technical stuff. Typically, I'm in the room with the composer when we spot and we exchange material as we're going through the movie. Very often I'll give like a dialogue crash to the composer so they have some clean material to work against, or things like that, or sketches of scenes like, oh, what are you doing in this scene and the other scene? But the scoring mixer, for the most part, it's like we just receive material from the scoring mixer. So like Phil and I, like the emails that I saw that we did were actually purely technical, which was like, what layout are you going to have? I need to prep my mix template. And very often on a lot of movies, I mean, on TV film, all the time this happens. Things are coming in late, right? Everything is always late. So the ability to email someone, hey, like, what layout are you going to have? Because I'm going to be mixing tomorrow at 6 a.m., So yeah, it's Phil?
Yeah, I always try to make sure to get in touch with the re-recording mixer ahead of time, because I know there's some other mixers, maybe some older school guys that don't even talk to them at all sometimes, and then they just give them a session full of stems. They're like, oh, okay, we have all this stuff we got to deal with in whatever format it was delivered in. So I always like to have kind of a rapport with the re-recording mixer to make sure I'm not eating up too many voices and making sure I'm in the right format. And sometimes on some projects, like if they're going to dub in Dolby Atmos, we might nerd out about like, oh, hey, I can split out a couple of these elements for them to use as objects in Atmos and things like that. But I think I kind of consider myself, me and the music editor are kind of the bridge between the music team and the sound team, apart from when they spot together. Because there are some projects where I know the composers prefer to spot separately, and they just do a music spot and there's a sound spot separately. So sometimes there's really not as much of a relationship yet between the sound team and the composer. So I like to make sure that the re-recording mixer knows what they're getting, and they're happy with what I'm delivering. Usually after I deliver a reel or an episode or something like that, I'll be like, hey, did everything work out well? I'm like, my surround level's okay, and did it tonally work all right? And then make adjustments if need be. Because I think if the dub mixer has a really good impression of someone from the music team, either whether it's me or the composer or the music editor, they're much more likely to, on their first mix pass, to maybe turn the music up a little bit, because like, oh, this sounds good. It's working well in the scene. It came all technically correct. It's in the right place. It's in the right format. I think it definitely puts a good foot forward for the music before the producers come in to do any notes on the dub.
Absolutely. So I kind of want to go back down with everybody and ask everyone the same question. So it will be kind of a 2-parter. So the first part would be, what is the most rewarding aspect of your job? What do you absolutely just love about your profession? When do you, and at what point, I guess, in the production timeline does that part or moment come? And also, is there something that is like your biggest pet peeve about your job? Something maybe some other person maybe has done to you, or something just about the process that it really kind of just like drives you crazy? So we'll go down and we'll start with Phil.
I'd say one of the most rewarding parts is recording orchestra. That's like, and I'm sure it's similar for Jonathan too, once you get to the stage and start recording, especially here in London or something where the musicians are just incredible. And, well, for me, it's like if I start recording orchestra and I like what's coming out of the monitors and it sounds good, it's kind of a really good goosebumpy feeling. As far as the worst part of it, I'd say is scheduling. I'm always just driven nuts because stuff is always moving around. I'll sometimes have a nice like 3-4 month schedule. Everything's perfect. Everything's one after the other lined up. And then of course, like half the projects want to move and they're all on top of each other. And sometimes I lose work because I can't work 2 projects at the same time. So that's probably what drives me the most crazy is all the scheduling conflicts that happen. But that's Hollywood.
That's absolutely. Peter.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't that one of our projects pushed by like 3 or 4 months, the whole mix? We were supposed to mix it, I think, December 2019. And I remember we were on the stage March 2020.
Yeah, that was Second Born Royals, I think, kept pushing. I think I was supposed to mix
Sudden Death too. Sudden Death was pushing too.
Oh, that as well?
Yeah.
So, I might not have been involved quite yet. I think I got hired that a little bit later.
But like, actually, to go back to the previous question, it's like, on Sudden Death specifically, the music editor like literally saved our ass on that movie because there were so many sections where we would just say on the stage, it's a movie that happens on a stadium, and we'd be like, hey man, can you just drop me a beat here? I want a beat coming from the speakers. And he'd just take a stem here and there and just cut us material so we could like, it's a stadium, there's music pounding all the time, so we literally were like all day long for the entire mix. It was just all the time cutting additional material. And it's not about recutting existing material, it's additional material. We're like, give me more. So yeah, from my point of view, like the music editor is like one of the most essential people on the mix stage from the point of view of a re-recording mixer, because they also know and understand the composer's vision. And on a lot of movies, we don't get to see the composer on the stage. So, if there's someone who actually can represent and then negotiate that vision into changes, that's amazing. But I digress. Going back to the question, the favorite part, I think solo the music VCA and just listen to what the music is going to do in a scene. I think that's the most fun, especially if it's orchestral. Like, I don't know why, but it's like, it's just so much fun to just literally just listen to the music and be like, okay, so that's going to be the scene. Because in big scenes, the music is going to drive it, right?
Right.
And so you give your first pass to just the music, and then we start layering the sound effects and everything, and it becomes like this thing. Okay, we did it. And the scheduling is sometimes the worst thing on the planet. Yeah. Or from my point of view, actually, this is something that I encountered once. This is to our conversation with Phil about like track layouts. Like I had a movie once which I got stems which were 5/1, quad, and stereo. And go figure, because every single cue has like, let's say 20, 30 stems, and every other cue was coming in a different format. So we were literally burning through 2 computers just for music. And talking about some of these technical things, it's the reason we talk technical is so that we can do art. It's getting our paintbrushes sorted and our palette sorted before we can actually paint. So, that's the stuff that matters to get it out of the way, and then just have fun and tell a story.
Yeah,
absolutely. Let's go to Crystal.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite aspects of music supervision is that you a lot of times are involved throughout the whole process. You start with the script because you've got to figure out what the project's going to need, how much it's going to cost, and kind of start getting those pieces in order. So you're involved in the initial stages where there's ideas and everybody's really excited about all the possibilities that could happen. And then subsequently, you're also there at the end, at the final mix stage, where you get to see everything come together and you get to see the result of all of everybody's work, and all of those ideas kind of come to fruition. And it's really rewarding, I think, to be able to just be a part of that whole process. And then I guess that's probably also like to the second part of your question, is that you're involved in the whole process. So you're there for a lot of those nitty gritty details, and all, like like everybody else has been saying, the schedule changes and script changes. And it's a constantly moving beast when you're working on a production. And trying to keep up with everything can be challenging sometimes, but overall.
It's interesting, Crystal, that you're actually one of the very few people in the filmmaking process that actually has the bird's eye view from beginning to end, right?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
most of us come in at a specific time and we leave the project, and it's like you're from the beginning to the end, actually.
Right.
Interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're reading the first version of the script to figure out, are there on-camera performances? Is there a song that's written into the script that the writers or directors really want, and figuring out, trying to head that off early on if that's going to be possible for that production and whether or not it's going to work. So yeah, a lot of times you get to see the whole thing, and you see it a lot of times the end looks very different than that very first that first script that you saw and you made all the notes for and all the budget for, and then you get the second draft and you throw that out the window and start over. So
Absolutely. And finally, Jonathan.
So I'll just have to plus one both of Phil's. Absolutely, the highlight of the entire film scoring process for me is the orchestral recording sessions. Particularly when it's a big orchestra, but even when it's a small chamber orchestra or a pickup ensemble of some sort. That process of live recording is that's the dessert. That's the great stuff. And a huge part of my passion for orchestration comes from the fact that that is the end result of that job. It's also that I'm very much a timbrelist, sort of in both electronic and acoustic mediums. I'm just really fascinated by sound colors. And when you hear that being, sort of brought into the world by 100 people all at the same time, it's a really magical thing. So for sure, that's the highlight. Yes, absolutely. Schedule changes is that would be the biggest low light. There are some technical things too. I really like Peter's point about why we have to go through tech, and it's for the art, and why we talk about it and why we think about it. There can be some challenges with how different composers working in different ways, and not necessarily always having that sort of unified approach to how they're exporting their materials. Peter was talking about that as well. We run into that as orchestrators sometimes. But for the most part, it is the schedule that causes more sort of more high blood pressure than anything else, I think.
All right, so let's move on to some audience, some questions. And I'm seeing some amazing messages here from people from all around the world. I'm seeing Puerto Rico, Brazil, Canada, and he says, "Thank you, everyone watching from whatever time it is for you, if you're staying up late to chat with us." So the first audience question comes for Crystal. What was your background before music supervision, and how did you come into your place in the industry? And this is from an aspiring music supervisor.
Okay. It's interesting. I was just watching another panel with music supervisors, and every single supervisor had a completely different path of how they got where they were, which I think is really common in this industry in general. I think paths kind of meander and wander a little bit. But my first job here in LA was in music clearance and licensing. I worked for a company called the Music Bridge, where I was a clearance coordinator, and really got a really big, broad understanding of music rights for film and TV and visual media. And from there, I went on to work as a music editor for a composer, Mark Leggett, who's one of the composers on the Dolly Parton's Heartstrings, and worked with him for years, and he gave me a really great understanding of just the possibilities of music for visual media and what that could be. And then I started working myself as a composer. And in independent film, I started kind of bringing together those early lessons in music clearance and licensing with the score, so that I could bring to the table a little bit more for the independent film, where their budget's a little strapped and they don't necessarily have the budget for a composer and a music supervisor. So I was able to present myself as someone who could do both. And from there, just kind of really started pursuing music supervision from there. So I come from a really broad, like very varied background actually of just music in all ways, from engineering recording sessions to editing to booking musicians and licensing and clearances. Just I got my feet wet in a lot of different areas. And I think that's been really helpful because, as I said, music supervision is this kind of big umbrella and you can be tasked with a bunch of different things. And the more you understand, I think, what people are going through and what their needs are, what you're asking them to do is just helpful to the process.
Absolutely. So our next question, audience question, is for Jonathan. Jonathan, what do you study if you want to become an orchestrator, and what could your way into the industry look like?
That is a great question. There are a couple of layers of answers, I would say. So a traditional classical theory and orchestration background is really valuable. So whether that's in a formal setting with in a university or something like that, or whether it's doing study on your own, get all the orchestration and instrumentation books that you can, and learning as much as possible, not only about how each of those instruments works individually, but how they can work together, because that's where the alchemy happens. And that alchemy happens more often with more experience. And that leads to my second thing. If you can compose music yourself for different instrumentation, that can also give you experience to better understand orchestration choices. The final sort of thing that you need is a really strong technical foundation in the tools that we use. And so again, to come back to Peter's point, it's that foundation that makes transcendental art possible. And the tools in my case and my team's case that we use is based around a couple of different softwares. And so having a sequencer that you know really well, where you can do MIDI cleanup and MIDI organization, and then get that into a notation software of some sort that you, again, know really well inside and out. The top two for that are Finale and Sibelius, and Dorico is the new kid on the block and not far behind, and ahead in certain ways already. So those are sort of the three big notation softwares that are in play. And that sort of those three levels together is what's going to give you the most robust foundation to do the job. But you shouldn't wait until you feel like you're a master in all of those to just start getting into it, because experience, nothing replaces experience. And the ways that can sometimes happen is if you can get a job with a composer or with another orchestrator as an assistant. Our assistants focus largely on sort of prepping the files that we need and arranging them in a way that we can do our orchestration work efficiently. But through doing that process, you're learning how the layout of all these different instruments kind of is, how you can see how the composer approached certain musical problems and solved them. All of that can be really valuable. So there is a way in, both from, I think, the composer side and the orchestrator side, of assisting to eventually get there. My first assistantship was with a composer. I always wanted to be certainly in media music, my dream was to be a working orchestrator. And so it started from a composer assistantship and went from there.
Wow, that's amazing. So the next audience question is for Peter and Phil. So you guys feel free to tag team this one. So this comes from a teacher, an educator. What should I tell my students is the best way to start a career in the film industry? That's pretty broad. So let's just focus, I guess, on your specifics, your specific specialties here.
Phil, how would you start?
Yeah.
Well, I did the college route. I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston. I was going to do a dual major with film scoring and music production, because I wanted to be a composer at one point. I dabbled in writing music, but ended up deciding I didn't want to do it professionally. Dropped the film scoring major. I didn't want to be in school that long, and just did MPNE. And then moved out here 10 years ago in 2010, and I was about to be a runner at a studio. That's a typical way if you're going to go into the record industry. If you want to be an engineer, you get a job being an intern or a runner at a recording studio, and you're doing bottom of the barrel kind of work, and then you hope eventually you do that well enough that they'll put you on in a session to assist, and you move up, and that's sort of the traditional way that engineers used to come into being. So I was about to do that, but I was lucky enough because I had emailed 5 or 6 scoring mixers that I could find emails for. And one guy got back to me, Greg Townley, who's Rolf Kent's engineer. And I was lucky enough, my first week in town, he just happened to need an assistant and interviewed me. And I got a job right off the bat, being his first, not his first ever, but his primary mix assistant. So that kind of got my foot in the door. And then he basically, that one job springboarded me into everything I can connect back to there. He introduced me to other engineers, other composers, and that just sort of started me in the community, and I started teching for some composers, doing that kind of stuff, in addition to mix engineers. And then basically once you get enough experience and you start to get some clients of your own, you kind of, I went freelance 5 years ago, once I had enough clients and sort of enough confidence to go out there on my own. So that's kind of my path. But I mean, there's a few different ways to do it. And I know the sound world is completely different because I was looking to be a sound editor too, and Peter will have thoughts on this as well. The biggest barrier, I think, probably for sound editing is figuring out the union stuff, because it can be tough to get into the union because you have to have experience to get into the union, but you can't have union project experience. So you can't get hired until you're in the union, but you need experience, but they won't hire you. Yeah, it's a bit of a game.
When I was joining, it was 175 days worked on movies or shows that have screened or been distributed. And if you think about that, that's kind of a funny requirement. So what does that mean?
But aren't union, right?
But they're not union. Well, you work your ass off on indie films and you pray that they get into festivals, essentially. Yeah. Recognizable festivals, right? Because like a mom and pop screening, unfortunately now we go... Well, not now because COVID did its own thing and mess in the industry. But just before COVID, like we were going through this madness of festivals, like it kind of became a bit too heavy and over-promising to a lot of directors and filmmakers of like, look, how many thousands of festivals you can get into. It's like, does that matter? Because really the truth is like the big ones matter, right? But to go back to the career thing, I think all of us have one thing in common. Like we follow people. Right? We can't do anything without our network, without either the composers that we've worked with or the directors, or the producers, post supervisors, or post houses, whatever. Like, so the one most important thing I always say to when students ask me to intern, when they want to intern for me or be assistants, etc., I always say, sure, but you got to work on your own network too, because you're going to spend some time with me. I'll show you all the tricks that I know, but really the value that you'll have is the people that you'll know. And you get a network around you, whether it's going to a school. I mean, you went to Berkeley, I went to USC here in LA, or if you live in LA, I mean, you're kind of born into this industry essentially, right? Because everybody on the block shoots movies or works in the entertainment industry essentially, right? So, some people do get a head start in that, but networking and just working on your craft. Like I worked exactly because of what you were saying, Phil, like in terms of to join the union to work on big movies, you have to be a union member, but to join you have this weird situation, like you got to work so much. So I worked on like 60 something short films before I even did my first feature. And I knew that's me investing my time. It was like literally for free. I knew I'm just learning, and I get to learn for free. So like when it comes to students asking like how do they get started, I mean there's so much technical things that we have to understand in this craft, because essentially it is a very technical craft. However, we don't look at it like a lot of our work involves technology, whether it's software, whether it's gear, whatever. Like we have to understand the process and learn that process by making a lot of mistakes on stupid little tiny films. And some of them are going to be jewels, and some of them are going to go to Sundance. Some of them are going to, become directors that make their first feature. And like, that is literally how you start your career. I mean, that's kind of what happened with score, actually. I worked on a short film for a producer who ended up being a producer on score, and that's how I got my MPSC nomination for that movie. And it was just an accident that I knew the right person. So yeah.
Which
Absolutely.
everyone should watch that film if you haven't seen it. Watch Score and then watch Making Waves. Great
Oh yeah,
complimentary films about music and then
Absolutely.
sound design.
yeah. And Making Waves are actually my teachers. It's funny.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That is a good documentary, Making Waves. It's fantastic. Absolutely. Phil, this one is for you. How do you mix a hybrid score like Ozark? Do you separate synths from acoustic elements or process them together? I found hard to blend them well, mainly low end.
I mean, a lot of that just comes from experience. I mean, everything's all separate. The nice thing about, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Danny and Sandra work in Pro Tools, which is kind of rare for composers. Most of them are in Logic or Cubase or Digital Performer. But because most of what they work with is recording audio, Danny plays all of the string parts. He'll just layer them up. And he does that without the intention of like, oh, I want this to sound like a 50-piece orchestra at Sony. It's more of a chamber kind of, processed, more like an album approach, if you will. So we're not trying to, mimic anything that we aren't doing with a full orchestra. But yeah, everything. So I get their whole session with all their plugins and all their settings, all their reverbs. First of all, I have to sort of separate it all out into stems. So my sessions are organized by stems, kind of the same way that a sound designer would organize a sound effects pre-dub session. So I have separate sound effects for each stem, or sorry, not sound effects, separate reverbs and effects and things like that. So yeah, I can EQ the stems differently, and every single element has its own separate processing. And the reverbs are, I have a variety of reverbs for each stem. So some things can be in small, tight rooms. Some things might have a big, long reverb on them, depending on what they are. That's kind of how I try to get depth in a mix, is different spaces. So not everything is in the same room. I do get some demos from composers, and I can tell they just threw everything in the same single reverb, and it sounds like just a sort of jumbled mess all in one room. So that's part of what I do there. The low end, I mean, that's kind of, you have to make sure you have a room that is somewhat accurate to really get the low end right. And I will note for both composers and anyone working in sound for film, make sure you either have monitors that are full range, or figure out how to get a subwoofer working well crossed over, because that bottom end, especially for theatrical stuff, is really, really important. I can tell when I've gotten projects from composers that don't have full range monitors, because there'll be a lot of stuff kind of bundled up around 70-80 hertz, which is probably about as low as their monitors go, really full range. So it can be kind of tough to really deal with that sort of theatrical low end unless you have a proper monitoring setup.
And a room, because the room also, you can't go lower than X hertz, like, unless you got a big room. And so that's also a catch-22. Like, how do you do low ends if you have a small room? Like, they're just not going to play properly.
Yeah, exactly. But as far as hybrid versus orchestral elements, I mean, I guess I don't really look at them that way. It's just, if there's synths on top of an orchestra, they're kind of, playing different parts. And a lot of that actually, I think, comes from basically orchestrating your synths. You don't want to have, a full 8-section bass playing, something really strong in the same exact register as some low synth bass. Sometimes you can blend them and get a cool effect there, but you have to kind of be aware of where your non-orchestral elements sit frequency wise against the orchestra, or whatever part of the orchestra you're using. Because that makes my job a lot easier. I don't really have to do too much if it's sort of arranged and produced properly, where they're sort of filling in holes where the orchestra isn't at certain times. So I think really, yeah, working with synths, it really, if you're having a trouble blending things, maybe try moving something up or down an octave. I mean, synths are much easier to do that than certain orchestral elements. But I'd say a lot of it really comes from the arrangement and the production of that.
Phil, I actually have a question about that. Like, on Ozark, for example, how many channels do you start off?
Like what I get from Danny and Sonder?
Yeah, how many channels? Because the reason I'm asking is sometimes on smaller movies, let's say they don't have a mixer or something. I've gotten like 100 stems sometimes, and so sometimes I'll get questions like on smaller projects that you do for a favor for a friend, right? Just going like, so I'll give you the stems, and it's like 100 tracks. It's like, no, you want those 100 tracks funneled down to something. So like on Ozark, as an example, like, what do you start with?
I mean, the biggest cues are not really that big. I mean, maybe 50, 60 elements. Most of them are pretty small, actually, because a lot of cues in Ozark is like a couple of string tracks from Danny. Maybe they do have this They have a pad they use. It's just they literally just recorded wine glasses and pitched them to tones, and they'll just layer those up to make chords and edit the notes around. So a couple of those. There's some plinky, distorted percussion they recorded. I don't know, like I need to ask them what it is because it's just called junk perk in my session. It's like trash cans and weird clinky things, and has a ton of distortion on it, and then it's filtered out too, so it's just very dark. But yeah, Ozark's actually kind of minimal.
And how many stems do you deliver to the stage?
851 stems.
Okay.
And that's pretty consistent for every. And I work with 2 Pro Tools rigs as well, so I print across to a second rig. So I'm kind of building. Music editors love me for that. I basically build their A/B roll session for the score and just hand it off to them, because a lot of projects I work on, a lot of indie films don't even hire a music editor, unfortunately. So it's kind of up to me to sort of organize everything, get it as clean and easy as possible for the dub mixer just to dump my tracks into their session. So yeah, in most TV these days, I know some people might ask about stereo versus surround and things like that. I mean, pretty much every TV show these days is dubbed in surround, even if it's not heard that way by a lot of people. So I'm usually always mixing at least in 5.1, if not 7.1, or eventually I'm planning to get Atmos in here to do some work in that format.
Absolutely. So we have another question for Jonathan and Crystal. Many composers aspire to be assistants for composers, but how can an orchestral player or a film composer get around to assisting an orchestrator?
I'm going to defer to Jonathan on that one. He'll probably know better than I would.
Okay. All right, Kaya, let's do that one again. But so just the last part.
All right. So many composers aspire to be assistants for composers, but how can an orchestral player or a film composer get around to assisting an orchestrator? I guess with the hopes of becoming, fulfilling and moving in that path.
Right. If it's wanting to move in the direction of becoming an orchestrator, then I think my previous answer still sort of applies, which is you want to get the experience around the process as much as possible from an orchestral side. So this question, though, they did mention that they might be a player. If you're an orchestral player already sitting in an orchestral section, some of our finest orchestrators have come out of the orchestra, certainly. So Randy Kerber comes to mind. The experience of playing in an orchestra can certainly inform how you can work as an orchestrator, understanding the intricacies of that. I don't know though, Crystal, like in terms of your work composing, since we both wear multiple hats, I'm curious, how has the assistant sort of landscape played out for you? Do you have assistants who are helping you in any of those acoustic ways, or sort of how does it play out for you?
So for me, I don't have any assistants right now, but I have worked as an assistant in a lot of different capacities, as a composer's assistant, an assistant engineer. I guess I don't know, whenever there's been something that I've been trying to learn more about, or maybe explore another path or something, it's all about just kind of doing your research to see who might be a good fit for you, and who maybe there's an orchestrator that maybe they love your work specifically, and kind of make sure to tailor it towards whoever you're approaching. So it's not just a blind, I'd like to be an orchestrator, I'm going to email every orchestrator I can find an email for, but to actually kind of pinpoint what you're looking to do, and approaching it from a learning aspect, I guess, of like, what do you want to learn to be able to do?
That's a really good point. And it also, that reminds me of a general sort of mindset that I think can be valuable to approach. And it's something that all of us have actually been touching on a little bit. In a huge part of all of our jobs is that we are helping solve problems, right? We're all working in service of this bigger thing that has all these moving parts. And if we can help solve those problems a little bit, then we are going to be of value to that process. And the assistant landscape can actually look like that too. So as Crystal's pointing out, if you can identify what are the problems, the types of problems that the thing you want to do, what are the types of problems you can solve for a person who's doing that job, that's incredibly valuable. And so that and the service element of it, I always like to think about the fact that I'm one part of something that's much bigger than me. And if I can help, if I can help make anything easier for other people rather than harder for other people, then I'm doing good work.
Yeah, that counts for composers as well. I think a lot of people that get into wannabe film composers don't realize until they get into the industry that you're in a service industry, and it's not about your communication; it's about you helping tell the director and writer's story. So you kind of have to check most of your ego at the door.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny, we say service industry. We literally, in mixed stages, the nicest mixed stages have, as we call it, the most furniture factor. Because they're meant to feel like almost hotels. You get executives and big directors come into the mixed stages and they have to feel right. Yeah. But,
And snacks.
Yeah, of course. Sushi. Come on. No, I heard that the session musicians get sushi for lunch or something like that. I'm in the wrong guild, I think.
I need to go out on the floor more often on tens, I guess.
There we go.
So I have another. We're almost done wrapping up. So for anyone who's watching, we're getting to the end here. So we have one more audience question for Jonathan. Does an orchestrator receive scenes from the film or show in order to make decisions for how the orchestration should go by taking in mind elements like sound effects and dialogue, or is that not part of your process at all?
As a sort of official part of the process, the orchestrator does not need to be seeing footage in order to do their job. The idea being that as an orchestrator, my job is musical. And so it's to realize that the main person I'm communicating with is the composer. The composer's communicating with the director, producers, et cetera. But I'm mainly communicating with the composer to realize their vision. Now, their vision is still in service of something else, but I need to make sure that musically it's working the way they want it to be working. So I don't need to know exactly how it's working with picture unless they need me to for some reason. And where this can get a little blurry is on the side of the orchestration job that veers closer to arranging. So if you're getting into a situation where there's a lot of creative work that needs to be being done, and that can be in collaboration with me and the composer, if I'm arranging their tracks as well, then having access to picture certainly becomes valuable, because arranging choices that I may make could be totally wrong for the scene if I was just flying blind. So that's the one arena sort of on the most sort of creative side of the orchestration spectrum where it can start to matter. For most of the sort of traditional orchestration work, it's purely a musical job and doesn't need to have picture in order to move forward.
Absolutely. Crystal, we have another question here. In what part of the timeline of a project does a director or producer usually start looking for a music supervisor? And would it be during script development, start of filming, or once shooting is complete? I know you mentioned you kind of are overseeing a lot of things, but when do you usually come in?
I think it depends on the project, because if there's maybe it's an independent film and there aren't a lot of musical elements to it, as far as there aren't any songs written into the score that you're going to have to clear before you go into production. It's all about just what needs to be done and when. So if there is something that needs to be handled before you go into production, they'll be looking for a music supervisor in pre-production. But there's plenty of cases where maybe in post-production, there's some issues that come up where all of a sudden you've got a project and they're going, oh, we didn't realize that we needed to, we weren't planning on putting a song here, but now we really would like to. We need some help with some licensing, or just issues come up throughout the whole process. So it just kind of depends on on the story, and what the story dictates the music needs are going to be. Sometimes there might not even be a music supervisor if it's, strictly completely score. There might not even be one.
Absolutely. And we have here's a good one for Phil. Is there any advice for composers who have to do their own mixes?
Ask the production for budget for a score mixer. No, I'm kidding. I mean, I would say mixing is kind of in a lot of ways like playing an instrument. As far as learning how to do it, just requires listening to a lot of things. I would say next time you listen to some of your favorite scores, really, instead of obsessing over some of the musical aspects, which we all love to do, pay attention to what kind of reverb on different things. Tonally, what are things? Are things very mid-rangey, or are they very, pristine and bright and kind of clear? Yeah, I would say that just listening to a lot of things from an engineering perspective to try to kind of get a sense. Use references. If you wrote a score and the temp, and you're trying to sort of get in the wheelhouse of a temp, have that in your mix session and maybe just listen to it and solo your cue and then go back to the temp and just take a listen to it and see kind of what the general wheelhouse is tonally, because there's so many different ways you could go with different cues. But yeah, without delving too deep into like a whole mixing tutorial, because I go on for hours about EQing and reverbs and compression and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I would say just critical listening is really important.
Absolutely. So we're probably going to wrap up around 8 o'clock. So we'll get a few more questions in. There's a lot of great questions, but we don't want to drag it on for too long. I know a lot of people are interested in, we're having a great conversation. We're having a great time. But this is a good one this is going to be for everyone. And I know you guys have already talked about kind of your starting point, how you kind of started your career, but so this question is, how did everyone get started? Like, how did you go from outsider to insider, and what were the important steps / connections, and how long did it take? So what, if you can remember, maybe we'll go down the line. If you can remember like a kind of a pivotal point in your career that you felt like, okay, now I made it. And if anyone is wondering what that scratching is my cat is using litter box. So apologies for that. This is what we're dealing with during these times, and I can't rush her. But so if it's coming through, I'm sorry. But we'll start with Phil. So Phil, what is kind of that pivotal moment you remember that, and how long did it take to get to that moment?
Well, I mean, I touched a little bit on my sort of path. So after I worked for Greg Townley, basically he ran out of work, so that he didn't have anything else to hire me for. So I bounced around for a few months, working for a few different people. And then he and another engineer, this guy Jim Hill, both referred me to Trevor Morris because he was looking for a tech. So I started working for him and I ended up staying with him for about 4.5 years. And once I got to the point where I was like, okay, Trevor was going to hire me independently, and I had a few other clients. It's very scary going from a sort of full position, like with a salary and kind of full-time work, to going out on your own into the unknown world of freelance. But I'd say I felt like I made it maybe after a year of being freelance. When I made it, I didn't get evicted or anything like that, and I was fine. I was like making enough money to support myself fully. I'd say that's the point where I made it. But kind of touching back on what we said before, I think really I tell people sometimes people come out from colleges that are just moved to LA, and I'll have coffee with them or whatever and just kind of help them get their foot in the industry. I'd say it's 55% your demeanor and personality and 45% your skills. Obviously you have to know what you're doing. You have to be, a certain level of good at what you do. But ultimately, most clients are going to come back to you because they remembered it was an easy process to work with. Everything came in on time. There weren't any big problems. You weren't a pain in the butt to work with. They're going to remember that a lot more than like, oh my God, the mix was so incredible, but he was such a pain to work with. I don't know. It's like I can work with someone that's a little bit less talented, but not like giving me heart palpitations because they're so stressful to work with. They're going to go with that person. So I would really put a stressor on relationships and, being good to work with.
Absolutely. Peter.
I'd actually say the relationships part, but also kind of, Phil, going back to the question you were answering previously, like what if the composer has to mix his own music? Also build your own network of people that are going to grow with you. Because if you're a composer, you'll probably want to be a composer, right? You don't want to keep on mixing your own stuff. There's also a high chance there's a music engineer or music mixer who is trying to get into the film world too. He needs experience. Grow with that person. It's kind of like, I think a lot of us have either been or met people like that in our career who were transitioning into these positions, and you kind of grow with someone, right? You grow together and you feel each other out, and there's some, I mean, Spielberg and Williams, right? I mean, although no, Williams was way ahead of the game. Spielberg was getting started, so it's a bad example. But anyhow, the starting point, I think, going to answer the question, I remember we were on a stage once. It wasn't my first mix. I was already mixing stuff, but I've had movies in like Sundance and Tribeca. Sundance, by then I had like every single year for 4 years straight. I had a movie, but it was, you still feel like you're on the outskirts, right? Very often you're like doing stuff, but you're not there yet, right? And I was already union, but still the union work we were doing, it wasn't like, not, it doesn't really matter, as some people would say. As a big mixer once said, like, you only want to work on things that matter. And I'm like, yeah, but to get there, you got to work on things that don't matter, right? So I remember the first time I was like, oh, wow, okay, I guess we're getting somewhere, is when I hit play on Reel 1 and the first thing that opened up is the Universal logo. And that was kind of like this moment where you're like, oh, okay. The problem with it is it's way too loud and we always have to down mix it. So that was something I learned on day one. The logos are mixed too loud and you have to actually pull it down. So I was like, oh, okay. Not only do I get to listen to it, but now I get to pull down the fader on that thing. So yeah, I think that was like the beginning. And then you just keep on going. You keep on going and just keep your head down. Keep your head down and listen to what people are doing and what people are saying. Sometimes it's just like, just read the room and that'll get you places. Yeah.
Absolutely. Crystal.
I think probably one of the biggest pivotal moments for me was just moving to LA and just making the decision to pursue this career. And I did that by applying for an internship. Actually, I found a company, the Music Bridge, that I ended up going on to work for. And I read about them. I read about their clients, the work that they did. And I thought it sounded really, really interesting. I was like, I want to work for this company. So I emailed the president of the company and asked if I could intern. And at that time I had just graduated from college. Well, I had graduated a year prior and I was living in Montana. I went to Montana State University. And so he told me, he said, yeah, if you get down here, you can have an internship. So, okay, we packed up the U-Haul and moved. And I remember I called him, I said, I'm here. And he goes, oh, you actually moved? I said, yeah, I did. I moved and I'm here. So when do I start? And that was, I think, I think it took a lot to make that happen, but that very first step, I think, was probably the most important.
Yeah, don't bait an internship because they'll show up right at the door. So
exactly, you tell them it can happen, they'll be there. Yeah.
I love that because I had a very similar situation once where it's like, I think people test you to be like, yeah, you're not going to do it, and then you do it. Like, I actually had a similar situation where I had like a really big producer say, yeah, sure, do it, and then I did it, and they're like, oh, okay, well then I guess you're hired. And we're like, oh shit, we just got hired for this movie, we have no idea what we're doing. Okay, we'll do it. So yeah, sometimes I guess it's about taking the big leap and just trusting your gut, but knowing when to do it too, right? That's also important to like understand and feel it out. Is that the right one?
Absolutely. So yeah, Jonathan.
It's funny, I was thinking as you guys were answering, there's so much of the process of getting established and moving from whatever outside means to whatever inside means. Some of that I think is all a construct, because, and some of it maybe you can see retrospectively, but as Peter was pointing out, for the most part, when your head is down and you're just in the middle of it, there's not necessarily a feeling of like, all right, I'm here. You're worrying about getting through that project, finding that next project. Are you making your client happy? Are you doing the best work that you can? There's a lot of foot in front of the other work that just happens. And then you can look back retrospectively and see some landmarks that you passed, but chances are that at the time you were passing them while just doing the work and didn't really notice it necessarily. So when I think back, like, I'd have to say one of retrospectively my biggest sort of oh yes moments would be my first big orchestral session, except that I also remember I was terrified for my whole first big orchestral session, because I actually, if I recall, I was working as a copyist on that session, and a relatively inexperienced copyist. And the copyist is the person who makes the actual parts for the players. So if there's any problem with any of the parts, number one, it's on you. And number two, it has to get fixed in those 10-minute breaks, basically, and be out in the next hour, or thousands of dollars are just, flying out the door. And so I look back, and that was amazing. And all of that is, of course, glorious. And it's also terrifying when you're in it. And, eventually it's less terrifying, but you're still just doing the work. And so I would throw, as a huge Star Wars geek, I would say that the times that I've gotten to participate in the Star Wars universe, Mandalorian certainly being one of those. The first time I got to compose a little bit of music for the Star Wars universe, thanks to my good friend Gordy Hobb, who composes for the Star Wars Battlefront games. Those are really special moments where I would, say, hey, if I could go back to 13-year-old Jonathan and whatever he was freaking out about, and just let him know, hey, it's going to be okay, buddy. Someday you're going to be doing music in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, I had a similar experience actually. I think what got me into film music initially actually was video game music, starting with Myst and Riven. I was obsessed with those games, and eventually got the soundtracks. And then eventually when I was like 13 or whatever, when Myst 3 came out, and I got the big deluxe package, the big giant box with Jack Wall's score in there. And I listened to that thing over and over and over again. And now I've worked with Jack a bunch, which that was definitely the first time I mixed something with Jack. I was like, this is really weird, because I was obsessed with your music when I was like in junior high. And now I'm mixing for you. That was definitely kind of a come to Jesus moment for sure.
Yeah, I can piggyback a little bit on that, because, people might know me just from Film Music Media as a film music journalist, but, I went to film school. I'm from Maryland. I marked 10 years out here in LA, and it's been, I still don't even, I don't think I personally have made it yet. I worked for Disney for 4 years, and I've been at Cartoon Network Studios and Production Systems for 5 years. So my background is not film music per se, but it's what got me into filmmaking. And that's what kind of created this. I created Film Music Media as kind of a creative to do stuff like this, to talk and stuff. So for anyone out there who is trying to get their foot in the door, it's just about, it is working hard, making connections. It's part luck, part skill. And I always remember a quote from James Gunn for some reason, and he's not a filmmaker that I particularly follow a lot, and he's a great director, but he was saying, don't look for what you can get out of something. Always look for what you can offer. And that will usually lead to open doors, because if you have something really unique to offer, something that's specifically you, people are going to gravitate towards that. So I think that's pretty cool.
And people want to work with people who are nice.
Yes. Don't be cynical. Don't be mean. Be a team player.
There's a guy I know who's on the agency side, and he always just say, don't be a dick. As a rule, to every single intern, every single person that goes through their office, he starts off, rule number 1, don't be a dick. Because nobody wants to work with dicks. So
my friend Dominic Lewis, if you watch my studio tour with him, he has a giant sign, don't be a dick when you walk in.
Yeah, that, and someone else also commented on, in addition to that, always think of who's next in the chain. The one post-production teacher I had in college, that always stuck with me. He said, always consider who's going to be receiving your work, because in film and television there's a whole chain of people that music especially goes through. So yeah, it's like don't leave the next person a complete mess to try to figure out what the hell you did. That's something to always consider as well.
Absolutely. So kind of to end on kind of a little bit fun note, I usually ask these in my other interviews, in my All Access interviews, but going down the line, if you could pick a different job than what you do on a film or a TV show that you've never done before that you maybe want to give a shot at, whether it's acting, writing, directing, be the grip, be the, whatever it is, anything from below the line or in front of the camera, what would it be? What would you love to just take a crack at, even if you don't know if you're going to be good at it or not? So whoever's ready can jump in first. John Powell did say stuntman, so that was a good one.
I'm tempted to say sound stuff because I am getting a little bit more into doing my own re-recording, mixing, and sound design. I haven't done a lot of it, but that's kind of similar to what I do, so that feels like cheating.
And so I know the guy that flies the ABC-7 chopper around Los Angeles for
that's awesome.
shooting all the pursuits. He always live streamed them on Facebook from the chopper, which is also. And I always thought that would be such a cool job because he's, believe it or not, in the union as a cinematographer. There's a special section. I always thought I kind of wanted to be a pilot. That's not going to happen because sound people don't make millions. But I'm like, but maybe I'd switch to something like that and still be in the union or something, making movies from air. That would be cool too.
I didn't even think of that because that actually was my original. I'm actually working on becoming a private pilot now because that was my original passion before. Before I ever got into music stuff. I had this whole dream of like going into the military, being a fighter pilot, then an airline pilot. It's not as expensive as you think, so it is more approachable than than you might think. But I never even thought of that there are pilot jobs in the film industry, so I guess it would be that stunt pilot.
Well, Phil, I mean, you're a fantastic photographer too. So if anyone wants to see some amazing photography, Phil has a great Instagram with all his photos too. So maybe cinematography could be a strong suit for you.
Yeah,
and cinematography would probably be my biggest pull.
Yeah.
In terms of something on set. Yeah, I'm always fascinated by and the cinematographers who then have become directors as opposed to actors who become directors, the other ways that people find paths to the other jobs. I'm fascinated about the differences between those.
Absolutely. Crystal, anything?
I think I'd say writer. I've always been just fascinated with writers in any format, whether it's for film or for novels or poetry or anything like that. Like I think putting your words out there like that is really can be really powerful. I think that would be really awesome to actually like go from an idea in your head to an entire film on screen. That would be kind of crazy, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love writing too, and I should be doing more, but it's funny. I'm stuck at home and I don't want to do much. It's like I could have written probably 13 scripts by now. But
I would love just to see other aspects. Like I've never been on a set before. I've never seen anything of production. I would love to just like go hang out and be in the fly in the wall for a day because I've never ever done that.
Absolutely, that would be. There's a few good behind the scenes features that I kind of have that, and one that I always go back to, Phil, is Darjeeling Limited. The Criterion Edition is exactly that. You can watch there's like no structured interviews. It's just literally like a camera just filming Wes Anderson and everybody working. And
I was a total DVD bonus feature junkie as a kid because I graduated high school in 2006. So that's well before a lot of the online schools and like Mix with the Masters and Pure Mix and Masterclass. None of that existed. So it's like that was my window into like behind the scene. I probably watched the bonus discs more on some movies than I did the actual film.
Absolutely.
Isn't the generation now spoiled? Like we're spoiled too because you have so many podcasts, interviews with everyone who's working on the industry. I mean, even this meeting, right? It's like the access to people, the knowledge, information, everything is out there versus like even 10, 15 years ago, it's like all you could do is a book from the library if you're lucky, right?
Yeah. Now, you literally can watch someone watch their screen what they do. Whereas back then I was like with DVD call, I'm like pausing like, I can kind of see that Pro Tools window. Like, what do those tracks look like? Like it's too fuzzy, Totally different world now.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I want to thank you all for sitting and joining us tonight, and to everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us as well, and for all the amazing, great questions. And I hope wherever you are, you're safe at home with your family. If COVID has impacted you directly, our sympathies and our support are with you. And of course, there's a lot of people in our industry that are still out of work. So it's a tough time for everybody, but I think it's important to latch on to what we love, latch on to the music, the movies, the books, the songs that kind of drive us and fuel us. So with that, I just want to say thanks so much. Where's my scotch? Another toast to everybody. And have a good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us. This is
Thank
really
you so
fun.
much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Right.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Bye,
Take
everybody.
care.
Thank you.